I will cop to the fact that we are a little bit cynical about Howard Schultz around here, and maybe this cynicism isn't warranted. Here is Stephanie Rule on MSNBC. She is a former, was she a hedge funder? Okay, yeah. She spent 14 years working in the finance industry. She interned for Merrill Lynch while in college.
We all want to be successful.
Look, she comes from finance. That doesn't necessarily. There's some really decent writers and people who have an interesting perspective that come from finance. That's not necessarily disqualifying. But I think sometimes when you're surrounded by people who have a specific attitude about anything, and it could be anything, that sometimes you get a little bit. Sometimes your thinking gets a little bit myopic, and here is Jeff Stein on MSNBC making the case that, or at least pointing out that maybe part of the reason what's animating his problem with a wealth tax is that he's so wealthy.
Jeff, what do you make of Howard Schultz criticizing these tax plans?
Well, if some presidential candidate was proposing a Jeff Stein tax that went after my income specifically and that of 80,000 friends in my income group, I think I would also oppose it and question its merit and validity.
Isn't it fair to say that he could criticize it and not think it's a good plan far beyond how it's going to affect him personally? Isn't it sort of naive to say, well, he wouldn't like it because it wouldn't be good for him? I mean,
I don't know if I would call it naive.
Hold on a second. He would make a whole lot more money sitting around as the CEO of Starbucks than he would being president of the United States.
Okay, that's true. I'm not sure how it's relevant.
It's relevant
I do
in
think
that just because he doesn't like the plan doesn't mean it's because it would hurt him personally.
No, I'm not alleging necessarily that that's why he opposes it, but it's at least worth asking the question and looking at how would he personally benefit from a tax on the rich that would take up a fair share of his wealth. That seems like a perfectly legitimate question to ask.
Well, no, wait a second. It's beyond legitimate because I can explain why someone might not want to be CEO of Starbucks anymore because you don't want to work anymore that hard. But what do you say? Well, but being president would be hard work. Yes, it would also be the most powerful person, arguably, in the world. Certainly,
most prestigious title on the planet.
Be a bit bigger than coffee shop boss.
This is going to be, once you've got your billions and you've been a CEO, maybe you want that experience, and that's a trade-off for money. But I don't know if you'll find too many people who are like, the difference between me paying $500 million or not paying $500 million is just simply public policy. I'll opt for the thing where I'm not paying $500 million. But beyond that, where's the argument that he's made that this is bad policy? I mean, I've watched all of these interviews. Yeah. He hasn't made a single argument that this is bad policy. You could say it's not fair.
Un-American.
You could say it's un-American.
He said it's un-American multiple times. And
it's not going to happen. But this guy has not made the argument that it's bad policy.
He's actually totally contradicted himself on that. Because if you took literally his hyperventilating about the deficit, then you would do that.
There is no argument that it's bad policy. There simply is not. There is not one iota of evidence that anyone alive or dead could produce that someone who has multiple billions of dollars will be any way less productive, personally or for society, if they pay several $100 million more in taxes. There's just no evidence. There's just nothing. You can't even make the argument theoretically because these guys have no difference. There's no way for them to contemplate the difference between having $12 billion or $6 billion.
Well, the argument would be that they would just take their capital and flee somewhere else where they're not imposing that many taxes on them. But that's not even the argument that he's making.
Well, I guess the argument would be, you know what? We could also pass a law that says if you're going to do that, capital flight, enjoy yourself. you can't come back to America.
Yeah. Simple.
Boom.
There you go.
And then we could see how many people are willing to leave the country and have their capital leave.
Yeah,
I
they
would
can
bet.
hide it in offshore accounts.
Well,
but
yes,
like
you
clearly,
could,
if we
but
were
that's not
making
a
laws
policy
like
argument.
that, we would also make a law to repatriate that money, right?
But that's not a policy argument. The argument that you can't raise a wealth tax because people will break the law is not a policy
That
argument.
would be an awesome Howard Schultz press conference. So it's like, look, you shouldn't even do it. We're just going to break the law anyways.
Right.
I'm stealing money from the Treasury right now.
Like, if anything,
anyways, I'd like to talk about how my first venti machine taught me about leadership, if I may.
If anything, that's an argument that the laws are not strict enough yet, and we need to make more.
Right. That's an argument that we need
Enforcement.
better enforcement.
I hate to do it by your logic, though, but even on these really, really narrow... I mean, this guy said that the deficit is the biggest domestic threat we face, which is actually... really says something, because he's been saying so much nonsense that's escaped notice. That's an incredibly irrational, insane thing to say by any measure, whether you're talking like MMT or ecology, whatever. But if you took that literally, which no one ever should, but these idiots on these TV shows should, because they're always, babbling about the deficit even still, they should say, well, if that's true, shouldn't there be like a patriot tax to take care of the deficit?
Of course.
Blah, 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 blah.
Right. You're saying that the country's on fire and you're the only one with a huge water tank.
I mean, of course, we wouldn't tax you to give everybody health care and free college. Obviously, we wouldn't want that for general well-being.
Right, but we got to get the deficit down to
but the
zero, and
deficit
you can
isn't-
do
right,
this.
yeah, there you go.